is on how to write an outline for an essay. Specifically, how to write a good introductory paragraph for the essay in which you have the main idea of the passage that you're writing about and a properly formed thesis statement, right? Which is one sentence, the thesis statement, and it isn't the same idea as your first sentence or so about the main idea of the passage. So in an introductory paragraph, you have the main idea of the passage that you're writing about. You state that in the tone first. Secondly, you can write other things, but you have to eventually, in the introductory paragraph, write your thesis statement, which is your angle on what your essay is going to be about, which isn't just saying this is what happens in the passage that you're writing about. So how do you come up with an interesting thesis? Right, so you have to look at the article, the passage that you're reading, and understand it, yes, but you have to go beyond that. The answer is you are looking for what makes that article distinctive, what makes it stand out, what makes it strong, or if on the other hand you're really supposed to be pointing out the weaknesses, same thing on the negative side. But mainly you'll be getting good quality passages to write about. So what is it? Is it the author's, you can't just write about techniques. You can't just say, this is an argumentative technique, refuting the opposing point. You can, but it's not going to be a very interesting analysis essay. So we're going to look through right now. We're going to look through how dumb can we get that article. And you're writing a précis already on it. Now you're going to look at it a different way. Yes, you could write an essay just based off of the second sentence of the précis, but it would be boring. We don't want to do that. All right, so let's look together through this whole article, but kind of quickly. What do I notice that's interesting? Well, I just have to, start looking through. Well, I have a reference to a philosopher. In the first body paragraph, I notice anything that stands out. I have to be, before I make my decisions, I have to be deciding what stands out. Then once I look through the whole thing, I can say, this is what I want to make my essay be more interesting. I want to reveal to a scorer on the AP test that I can find the most interesting techniques, not just the ordinary ones, right? The more complex, the more subtle ones, so on. Okay, so I have this word pejoratives, powerful pejoratives, two problems. I have a little triangle here, don't I, of alliteration. That might add a little interest to the essay, right? Pejoratives are negative comments, negative remarks. So let's look on to the next paragraph. Yes, I would say there's something interesting here. Because I have an excerpt, I have a reference, an allusion. All right. Starts with I thought it was in this paragraph, but I guess not. I thought there was, oh, it's in the one before. Okay. So let me go back up to the one before. It is. Oh, right here. So this allusion, we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and the government of the folks, by the folks, for the folks. I have this allusion. That might be interesting. Do I know what it's to? It's to the Gettysburg Address, but it's reworked. So I might write about this author, how she has reworked a famous excerpt from the Gettysburg Address to make it more interesting, perhaps. Let's keep moving on. We're going to go to the next page, right there. And now, do I notice what that the author is using an argumentative technique on page 263? I do. Which one is it? So this science writer says, we have nothing to worry about that this young people are navel-gazing and watching a lot of videos. That these aren't zombie-like characteristics of the kids that watch the videos, and they're not mental atrophy. And then our author, Susan Jacoby, says balderdash, right? That means, no, you're wrong in some terms. So this is an opposing point, and she is refuting it. She is making this a little more interesting in her imagery, referring to the kids in such an extreme manner and with such extreme wording. It is interesting. We can picture that perhaps a kid who has watched 25 straight hours of Teletubbies followed by SpongeBob. All right? So it is interesting. It draws up some thoughts in our minds, this imagery, like those TV shows. And such wording is mesmerized. So, this technique is not just refutation of an opposing point, it's enhanced by the author. We could write about that in our writing. Our analysis would be more interesting. What's this word? Jeremiads. It is a biblical reference to the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. And he was a young prophet, maybe the youngest of all the prophets, and the people, he would feel the people wouldn't listen to him, maybe because of his youth. And in fact, I think they did throw him into a pit one time. But he was known as the whining prophet, finding fault with things. So people who are in favor of technology, videos and so on, they discount those who are naysayers and who are negative. That's the idea there. However, the point is, we have a biblical reference. Now, let's go back to the previous page really quickly. There we go. We have this word, apocalyptic predictions. All right? Bad things are going to happen. What does apocalyptic mean? Having to do with the end times. It's a biblical reference, again, because the last book of the Bible, though it's called Revelations, it's also called the book of the Apocalypse. And we just use the term generally now, but it really originates in that biblical reference, or it brings that up connotatively anyway. So we have that on both pages. We should be paying attention to that. What's the effect of this? Ominous, biblical overtones. God's condemning is a suggested message. I think there's a lot of interest with that sort of diction, those word choices and those allusions. So let's move on. What else is really interesting in this article? All right, let's move on to the next to the last page, page 264. So, we do have a reference here, or right below here, to Roosevelt, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, first we have a contrast. We have a reference to a certain president who said, "I'm the decider," and didn't include people in the general population in his decisions, whereas Franklin Delano Roosevelt did. And the people did comply, and the people did do research. So here is a very, doesn't name the president, it's kind of subtle, but it is damning, it is condemning, all right? And it is subtle. So we might note those aspects of this contrast, not just that there's contrast. And this contrast comes to light because we have quite a lot of imagery in this anecdote, or this historical reference about the fireside chats. It's interesting, we can picture it. Now let's move to the end. So, I'm sorry about that. Well, it's a little small. So at the end, do we have anything of great interest? Yes, we do. I would say let's go right to the final paragraph. You've got to look for this stuff. It's not going to be obvious always. But if we look right here, we have rote efforts to raise, we have some alliteration, but then we have raise standardized scores, stuffing students specific, answers to specific tests. We have a lot of S alliteration, which is called sibilance. And it's a repetition of any hissing sound, like the Z's, the SH's, the S's. If someone is hissing, either they're letting off steam or they're very angry about something, right? We get a feeling that the author is very negative about the anti-intellectual trend in schools and that they're not able to address this issue. So that's why she goes to the political realm to probably solve it. But again here, this does add interest. This does add interest. So my last point is, you are going to write an introductory paragraph and you're going to state in an interesting way the main idea of this whole passage, this article. And then you're going to write your own thesis, but keep in mind what I just went over. Can you include some of those ideas? So your thesis should have the point you're going to make about what made this a high-quality essay or interesting essay. But then you should name the focus for each of the three sections of your essay in the one thesis statement. So you don't say my first section will be about my second, my third, but you name them as the main methods that the author uses to accomplish her purpose in the one sentence that is your thesis statement. I'm going to check the time. If I have any other time, I will show you what I have written. I do have a little bit of time. So, what I wrote this morning was my first sentence is going to be the main idea of the passage, but I don't want to be boring, right? So I state here, Susan Jacoby's article supports and identifies aspects of the two primary causes of America's many decades of descent into idiocy, but they can be summed up as Americans' smug, infantile attitudes. So I make it clear for the reader. We don't want to learn, and you can't make us. Isn't that a much more interesting way of saying what the article is about, kind of bringing it to life? I could maybe put little quotes around that. Now, you're going to write your own idea, like you write it your own way. The main idea of the passage, don't use what I wrote. But make it interesting. And now you're going to make a thesis statement. I haven't written one, but this does sum up some of the ideas that I was just going over. You have to write about the boring stuff, all right, that she has well researched, or the argumentative techniques like refuting an opposing point or so on. But you have to show the interest in those two, the stylistic choices that add interest. So you could include this in your thesis statement. Don't use those words. Her diction is biblically related, but it's also ominous. The author enters in, she talks about herself. I didn't go over that, but she does refer to her 13-year-old self reading books in a treehouse. So that adds interest. I didn't cover everything. That was one of the anecdotes, the one about Roosevelt. But she ends with a hopeful tone. And because she does have hope that there will be a practical solution to this that can be achieved politically. So you have to have some down-to-earth, practical, basic techniques, reference, and so on. But you should write about the more interesting aspects of her writing too. So, one introductory paragraph, main idea stated in an interesting way, and a thesis statement which is one sentence, but it comprises the three parts of your three focuses in your essay,